Matt, you're off by a minute.
Some of the same questions. I just want to see how.
Very red, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But you don't have to do it.
I thought a lot of these questions were good, so I like the ones we got.
Good afternoon and welcome back to Wayne State University's Partridge Auditorium for the special Detroit Mayoral Town Hall meeting. I'm Craig Foley, your moderator. We're waiting on Mayor Ken Cockrel, who will be out momentarily. In the last hour, you heard Dave Bing lay out his vision for Detroit. Now it is, of course, Mayor Ken Cockrel's turn. And to help us get the facts this afternoon, we have an esteemed panel of journalists. Again, Hewell Perkins anchors the evening newscast for Fox 2 Detroit. And a reminder, this is being, of course, a webcast on Fox 2's website. Also, we have Rochelle Riley, Metro columnist for the Detroit Free Press, and Bankole Thompson, the senior editor of the Michigan Chronicle, is with us once again. A reminder, the audience here in the auditorium will have a chance to ask questions. We will continue to collect questions written on the index cards we've been passing out, and I will ask some of those questions a little bit later in the hour. And a reminder, this event is being broadcast live on 1019 WDET and also at govaffairs.wayne.edu and Fox 2's website as well. So please hold your applause until the very end. We want to make sure that everyone, not just here in the auditorium, but also out there listening on the radio or on the web, get a chance to hear the candidates' full answers. So thank you very much. Now, Ken Cockrel Jr. is with us. He has worked for several years as a journalist before getting involved in politics. He served 2 years on the Wayne County Commission before becoming the youngest person elected to Detroit City Council in 1997. He was elected council president in 2005 and became mayor last September after the resignation of Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick. Mayor Cockrel, you now have 3 minutes for an opening statement. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. Once again, I'm Mayor Ken Cockrel Jr., and I have served as the mayor of the city of Detroit for roughly about 7 months. That makes me a relative newcomer to the office of mayor. However, I'm not a newcomer to political leadership. The very first elected office that I ever held actually was a Citizens District Council position in my own neighborhood, which is Woodbridge. Woodbridge is a historic district, which is actually just a couple of blocks to the west of here. So obviously everybody here knows where Mathai Field is. The Woodbridge Historic District is just west of Trumbull. And we live there and have lived in that neighborhood, my wife and I, and we're raising 5 children there now. We've been in the Woodbridge neighborhood for a little less than 20 years or so. I subsequently ran for the office of Wayne County Commission, specifically Wayne County Commission District number 5, which basically at that time was the southwest part of the city of Detroit. I ran in 1994, was successful, and took office in January of 1995. Subsequently ran for a second term on the county commission, and I served half of my second term. The reason I only served half of a second term is because I chose to actually run for city council in 1997 because I felt that that would be a place where I could make more of a difference. So I was elected to the council in 1997 and took office in January of 1998. Subsequently ran for re-election in 2001, and at that time was elevated to the position of President Pro Tem. Ran a third time in 2005, and at that point, based on being the highest vote getter in that election, became council president, and I served in that capacity until September 19th of last year when circumstances surrounding my predecessor forced him to resign, and I had to transition into the role of mayor. Since becoming mayor, I've made my primary focus 3 key areas. First, getting the city of Detroit's financial house in order by proposing a plan as well as a budget for the coming fiscal year that seeks to eliminate a $250 million deficit. Secondly, crime fighting, crime prevention, and also promoting public safety. And we've been doing that through an aggressive program of community policing that involves not only putting police back on the streets from the standpoint of walking a beat, but also opening up new mini stations, doubling the size of the City of Detroit Police Department's scrap metal task force, and also working on plans to reduce police response time. We recently submitted a request also to the federal government for additional officers through the economic stimulus package. Last but definitely not least, our major focus has also been on the economy and on trying to diversify our economy by attracting different types of industry to the city of Detroit and also seeking to create different types of jobs. In December of last year, I opened up an Office of Energy and Sustainability, which has a focus of trying to attract and promote green job development here in the city of Detroit, which will be key for us diversifying our economy and creating different types of jobs as we move into the future. It's been an honor to serve as your mayor for the past 7 months and to serve you in various other capacities for about 14 years. and I'm humbly asking for your vote so that I can continue on as mayor for the rest of this year and then hopefully beyond for the next 4 years. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mayor Cockrel, and we'll now let the fun begin. We're going to have our panel ask some questions of the mayor. Rochelle Riley, you get to start us off this time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Craig. Mr. Mayor, the last elected mayor went to jail. The current elected city council is under investigation by the FBI. If you're elected next week, what would your administration do to prevent or to eliminate corruption? And specifically, what would you do differently? Because there is an ethics policy, which apparently no one cares about.
Well, it's a very good question, and I think, frankly, on a certain level, it does point out the problems with the policy. I mean, any law is ultimately just words on paper, and if certain people have it in their mind to be corrupt and to get up to things that they shouldn't be doing, simply having an ethics policy, no matter how strongly worded it is really not going to stop them. I think what it really comes down to, and what I have tried to do in my time as mayor, is to investigate. So we are really in an ongoing process of reviewing what we do in the city of Detroit and how we do it. For example, that includes taking a look at existing contracts to see whether or not these contracts were truly needed. Where did they come from? Are they perhaps the result of somebody's sweetheart deal? If we find, for example, that these contracts are not needed, we terminate them. We have also terminated employees as well who were in jobs that they shouldn't have been in. There was a situation that actually occurred shortly before I took office where there were about 14 people that were shifted into civil service positions, and it came to us actually through anonymous letters that these people really had no business being in these jobs. Subsequently, we investigated that and we found out that that was actually true, that these people had been inserted by the former mayor into these jobs because they were friends and family that he was trying to look out for. So after doing an investigation and determining that they did not meet the civil service requirements, hadn't gone through the proper procedure, hadn't completed testing, we terminated 12 of them. The reason why we didn't do all 14 is because it turned out that 2 of them actually had followed the proper procedure, and because they were now civil service, have to remain in their positions. So it's really an ongoing investigative process directed not only at contracts and procurement, but also looking at employees, and that has to continue. And when you find problem people, then you deal with them.
Michael A. Thompson of the Michigan Chronicle next.
Mr. Mayor, on the Cobo deal, just last week you admitted that you should have been personally involved with City Council on this issue of Cobo. Now, it's a different tone from the position that you took at the onset of pushing this Cobo deal. What happened here?
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, I was always involved. I think what I said last week, which I stand by, is in a retrospect, I could have been more personally involved. And I do hold true to that position. So, in terms of what happened, in terms of my position, if that's what you mean, I don't really see it as a shift in position. I mean, the bottom line is I still
You don't
fought.
think it's a flip-flop?
No, I don't think it's flip-flop at all. I still, bottom line, feel that that was a good deal for the city of Detroit, and I still believe that. Was it a perfect deal? Absolutely not. Obviously, a majority council didn't even feel that it was a good deal, and I think where we're at this point doesn't make a whole lot of sense for me to stamp my feet and cry in my beer about it, but to step back, regroup, recognize what's happened, and then try to move from there. I think in any situation, if you do something and it doesn't quite go the way you want, you have to accept some level of responsibility for it, and I'm prepared to accept that. But I also still stand by the fact that I felt it was a good deal for the city, and we will try to craft one that we think everybody can live with.
I do have a quick follow about that issue and others. There are members of the Detroit City Council who have been known to be petty. And sometimes the simple reason for not wanting to do something is not being involved from the beginning, not being able to put a stamp on it before it goes somewhere, whether it's a good idea or not. In hindsight, should you have worked out something with the City Council first before working with the governor and with other leaders to try and get that deal going?
You know, the thing is, it was really impossible to do that on a certain level, A, and B, we have to remember, and I know that there are certain council members who are trying to rewrite history on this issue, but don't buy into that. The fact of the matter is, the Cobo deal, that, at least as it relates to the expansion and so forth, that is the same deal that was before City Council for at least 6 months to a year prior to it being acted on earlier this year.
But had any of them read it?
Well, I had.
Okay.
Now, I can't take responsibility for what other folks read. I can only take responsibility for what I read. And I know I read it when I was on city council, but, you know, do I know, for example, that President Conyers read it? How would I know that? How would I know if President Pro Tem Watson read it? How would I know that? I can't take responsibility for what other people read or don't read, but I can tell you this. Essentially, the same deal was before council over 6 months or so ago. Now, the substance of the authority did change, but that changed, frankly, the week before Christmas at 1 o'clock in the morning. And that changed because the state Senate was actually trying to pull a coup d'etat, so to speak, in terms of the authority structure. Frankly, we would have wound up with a worse deal had I not been alerted to that and driven to Lansing in order to try to intervene and work out something that would have been better for the city of Detroit. Had I not done that, what you would have wound up with was a 7-member authority with Oakland County controlling 3 of those votes. Because what the Senate was actually trying to do was they were trying to create a direct appointment to that authority for themselves, and they also wanted to have confirmation power over the governor's appointee. At the same time, Oakland County would have had its own appointment. That got killed because when I got the phone call of what was going on, I drove to Lansing, met with the governor, met with Mike Bishop, met with Andy Dillon, and told them, frankly, that is not going to fly, and that is not something that we're going to support. I can't take that to city council. So what then resulted was a series of marathon discussions that began at like 1 o'clock in the morning and went into the wee hours of the morning that resulted in us coming up with the 5-person authority concept whereby all decisions would actually have to be unanimous and all people on the authority would have had veto power, which again, not perfect, but certainly would have been better than an authority where Oakland County had control of 3 votes and potentially would have been in the driver's seat. Now, maybe you could make an argument that says I should have called up all of those council members at 3:30 in the morning and said, look, this is what's going on. But things were moving very fast and very furious at that point. Once it did pass through the legislature later that morning, we immediately reached out to all council members and said, look, this is what happened, this is what the deal is, and we want you to know. And that process never stopped.
We're not trying to have a city council meeting here. When you step back a little bit and look at this deal, if the legislation, the authority indicates clearly, in clear terms, that the city council has the absolute right to kill this, the question is, when you, in hindsight, is the council justified in the position that they took?
Obviously, I disagree, but, you know, I respect the court's decision.
All right, we'll leave it there. We could be on Kobo for the next hour if we tried. Hewell Perkins, you're up.
But it's really a matter of personalities here. Congressman John Conyers has endorsed you for the office of Mayor of Detroit, and yet his wife, Council President Monica Conyers, is hemming and hawing, not quite sure who she will endorse. That's the question, too, about the relationships between the mayor and the city council, the animosities that tend to arise now and then. My question to you is, are you prepared today to recommend to the citizens of Detroit that they remove certain members of the council so that you can better serve them?
You want me to name names?
I want you to name names, if you're prepared.
I got to tell you, I'm not going there. And the reason why is politically and strategically, it would be foolhardy for me. I mean, especially, we can't in the same breath talk about trying to have a better relationship with council members, and then I'd be asked to turn around and say, this is who I think you ought to get rid of. Because it's not like that's not going to get back to them. So that's certainly, I mean, come on. So it would
But if some of them are saying openly that they do not support you, I'm wondering
Right.
if you are going to do the same.
Well, I mean, that's their right. You know, and I'll be honest in saying that, you know, when the time comes, there are probably certain council members that I may not vote for. But, you know, at the end of the day, here's how I approach it. You don't have to like somebody to work with them. And I'm sure that all of you can probably relate to that, and that many people in the audience, not only in this room, but also folks that are listening on the radio or watching this streamed on the web. You've probably got people that you go to work with every single day that you cannot stand, but you work with them. You check the personal stuff at the door, and you come together, and you work together for the common purpose of doing whatever it is that you're supposed to do. And that's how I approach my job. That's how I approached it when I was on city council. And that's how I approach it as mayor. I mean, you don't have to like me, but if we can at least keep in mind that we're here for a purpose, we're here for a goal, a common goal, and that goal is to try to move the city of Detroit forward, that's how I think we ought to deal. But no, I'm not going to sit here and say, yeah, this person ought to go and that person ought to go. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
All right, Rochelle
Sorry.
Riley of the Detroit Free Press is up next.
Mr. Mayor, you have said in several interviews that you understand the importance of the school system and what needs to happen for Detroit to be rebuilt. The problem is you're not in charge of the schools.
Yeah.
So while many leaders talk about their hope for the schools, nothing really changes. Do you foresee, if you're elected again, if you're elected to continue to serve, your administration trying to do something to either take over the schools or work in a different way with the school leaders to improve that district, because you cannot succeed without that district?
I'm actually already working in a different way with the school district. As a matter of fact, since I've been in office, my administration has worked in partnership with the Board of Education on a couple of key issues. Mostly those issues have had to do with public safety issues. For example, shortly after the shooting that took place at Henry Ford High School last fall, I immediately called then Superintendent Connie Calloway and said, I'd like to sit down with you and talk about maybe some things that we can do. And we did that. And one of the things that actually came out of that was that our police chief and the chief of the Detroit Public Schools Public Safety Department also had a meeting. And that led to what is now a standing weekly meeting between both departments, where they share information, talk about issues that affect both, discuss issues of police deployment around public schools. And it's been a very useful process. Some of what's come out of that is a preliminary public safety plan that focuses strictly on safety issues and what some people would refer to as a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats of schools, mainly, again, high schools in the city of Detroit. The other thing that came out of it is that now our police department has been able to work with DPS Public Safety to get them using the same radio system, the CRISNet system, and that enables them to communicate immediately. And I didn't know this, I just thought all these guys were all on the same system, but it turned out actually that it used to be that if you were a Detroit public safety officer and you needed the assistance of the Detroit police, you had to call 911 from a landline or a cell phone, just like anybody else. We've eliminated that. So more recently, one of the other things that I did was a listening tour of 4 high schools in the city of Detroit, where I actually went into the schools to hear what was on the students' mind. We started out, we did, Tim, what was it we did? The first one was Central, and then we did Southeastern, Northwestern, and we wrapped up with Osborne. And it was very useful just to hear not only the kids' safety concerns, but also some of their suggestions and recommendations on things that should be done to improve safety in and around schools. More recently, this was actually last week, I did meet with the interim superintendent, and I'm also planning to meet with Mr. Bob to discuss common issues. So we are continuing to meet. And the idea of taking over the school system from a day-to-day management standpoint is something that I'm also interested and open to once we're out of this emergency financial manager arrangement, which I think we're going to be in for at least the rest of this year.
Let me ask just a quick follow, and it's a yes or no follow. If Plymouth businessman Robert Thompson came to you with $200 million today for 15 new high schools, would you take it?
Would they be charter schools?
They would be charter schools.
Here's the concern that I have with that. I think we have to be very careful about introducing several new charter schools into the city of Detroit. And the reason why, and this is how I look at it, I know you asked for a yes or no.
But you're the mayor, so.
The problem is the vast majority of kids in this country, not just in Detroit, are always going to be in public schools. And I know people hold charter schools out as this is the best alternative. This is where our kids ought to be. That's kind of like lifeboats on the Titanic. I mean, if you accept that public schools are a failing institution, then the solution is not to create more of these lifeboats in the form of charter schools. It's to keep the Titanic from sinking, because the majority of our kids are going to be in public schools. So I support competition. I think that having a certain degree of competition out there, whether it's charter, private schools, parochial schools, in the mix, that's good because it provides some choices. But most of our kids are going to be in public schools, so if we're going to address what's wrong with education, not only in this city but in this country, we got to deal with that. And charter schools are not going. You're not going to have enough of them. You've got to fix public schools.
So is that a no?
I would say that's a qualified no, yes.
And I want to just do a quick follow-up. Same question I asked Mr. Bing is, once Mr. Bob's tenure at the Detroit Public Schools is deemed done, are you okay with transferring control of the schools back to the board that exists right now?
No, not necessarily. I think we need to go in a different direction.
Very good. All right, Ben Calais-Thompson of the Michigan Chronicles.
Mr. Mayor, we want to have you on the record here. We asked the same question to your opponent in a bid to seek accountability of local government here. There is a movement out there pushing council by districts to amend the city charter. Can Mayor Ken Cockrel Jr. tell us this afternoon if he supports the movement for council by districts?
Yes, I do.
Why?
I think it allows for more accountability, and I think it also creates a direct line of communication between council members and the people that they represent. And I've got experience with districts because, again, prior to being on city council, I was a county commissioner. So I represented a district. Being in a district, it forces you to really get to know the neighborhoods in your district, the specific issues in your districts, the business community in your districts. It really does force that. Now, I try to get to know the entire city as mayor, but it's harder when you represent a bigger geographic area. And I experienced that even on council. Having been on council for a while, I've got a pretty good working knowledge of the whole city, but that took some time. With districts, it's easier.
Do you support limiting the numbers of council members that we have from 9 to, let's say, 5, 7?
Yeah, I think that's something that ought to be looked at, because the reality is we are in a city that has lost population. So I think it's a valid question to say, well, since we've lost population and since government probably needs to shrink, that may need to include city council as well. Maybe you don't need 9 council members anymore.
Well, I'd like to remind folks you're listening to a mayoral town hall meeting with Ken Cockrel Jr. from Wayne State University. We're broadcasting this event live on 101.9 WDET, also on Fox 2 Detroit's website and at govaffairs.wayne.edu. And if you have questions, there will be time for audience questions a little bit later on in the broadcast. So fill out your cards, raise your hand, and Amanda here will come and pick them up from you. And we're going to continue on with the panel discussion right now. The next question is, it's up to Hewell Perkins from Fox 2. Hewell, you're up.
Thank you. This month, Forbes magazine listed Detroit as the most dangerous city in the country. Crime is routinely among the top concerns of citizens here. But given the budget restraints, what can you do as mayor to reduce the crime rate?
Mm-hmm. There's a number of things that we can do. Some of the things that we're already doing, some of which I alluded to, is number one is recognizing that we are under budget constraints. We have submitted an application to the federal government under the economic stimulus package for funding that we could use to hire an additional 100 to 300 officers to put on the streets. That's through the COPS program, which is a program that the federal government initiated actually under Bill Clinton, that provides local municipalities with money that they can use to hire additional officers. That's one thing. The other thing that we have also done is we've tried to be more strategic about how we deploy, and we're going to continue to do this. Mini stations, we've opened up 6 new mini stations in the city of Detroit for the purpose of bringing the police department and the community closer together. We've also rolled out the city of Detroit's first ever mobile mini station. And we're currently in the process of trying to develop a plan that we can use to reduce police response time. Part of how we're trying to look at this is by analyzing some of the things that have been done, for example, in New York and in other parts of the country where they really used analysis of crime data heavily in terms of making police deployment decisions. And that basically involves taking a look at what's happening, when it's happening, and where it's happening, and then you can begin to direct your police resources and your people based on what the data is showing you.
Are you in favor of offering incentives to shift population so that you aggregate citizens in areas where those services are easier, more accessible?
We may end up actually doing that. I have asked the director of the Planning and Development Department at the City of Detroit to convene a task force to look at creative downsizing, which is basically what you're talking about. And so that's being done as we speak. What we intend to do is not only solicit the input of local community groups and nonprofits who've taken a look at this issue, but also some people who I guess for want of a better term, would be considered subject matter experts who've actually had involvement in doing this in other parts of the country. There's places like Youngstown, Ohio, and other areas where it's been done, and we're looking at some of those examples as well.
Rochelle Riley.
I have a question about regionalism, but before I do that, let me ask a quick follow to the crime issue. And this came from students and faculty here at Wayne State. The city of Oakland, California is considering using private guards to patrol some areas of that city as a cost-cutting move. Is that something you would consider as the next elected mayor of Detroit?
No.
Why not?
It just sounds kind of bizarre to me. Private guard? I mean, are these...
Well, it is Oakland, California, but...
Yeah, I have some issues with that. You've got to have officers on the street doing this work. It's not... You can't have a city policed by rent-a-cops. I'm sorry.
Okay. Now,
we don't want Paul Blart out there making arrests in Southwest Detroit or the East Side. So
that was good, Mr. Mayor. Now, my question has to do with regionalism. Metropolitan areas around the country have found ways to merge county and city services to cut costs and increase population. But in addition, Detroit has the bigger issues of its failing economy in various ways across southeastern Michigan, and a real problem with racism. Mm-hmm. And you've got to combat both of those things to try and make some type of headway on helping Detroit be the center of a region. Can you talk a little bit about how you would do that in your administration as you continue?
Well, I think regional cooperation on some specific issues makes sense. The Cobo piece, for example. Another area where I think regional cooperation makes a lot of sense is mass transit. You know, we not only need light rail here in the city of Detroit, but I'm also of the belief that we don't need to have two bus systems. I've said that publicly before, and I stand by it. I think that SMART and DDOT need to ultimately be merged. I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense for Detroit and this region to be serviced by two bus systems, both of which arguably operate at various levels of inefficiency. So I think there's some areas where regional cooperation makes a lot of sense, and we ought to pursue that. And in the case of mass transit, we are in fact doing that. And the Cobo piece, even though it's on hold at the moment, I don't consider it to be dead. One other area as well is perhaps joint purchasing. And this is something actually that, and maybe you were even kind of referencing it in your statement, but what some cities and counties have done in other areas is that they do joint purchases of certain products and services for the sake of cost saving. And to give you an example, one example is in the wintertime, we all buy salt because we all have to salt the roads. So for example, the prospects of maybe doing a joint purchasing agreement where you can go for certain products, that makes some sense. It's something we've begun to take a look at. It can get kind of complicated because we've got our own purchasing ordinances and they have their purchasing ordinances, but it's something that I think is worth exploring.
How do you prevent regionalism from becoming a process in which racial animosities are again exposed, as we saw with Cobo?
Right.
It's very near the surface. Whenever there's a dispute, the racial hatred is ramped up.
Yeah, you can't. But see, one thing also is I think we need to acknowledge that elephant in the room. And let's be real about that. I mean, even though we're living in an era where we have an African American sitting in the White House, I think we'd be fooling ourselves if we said that racism doesn't exist. So that's real. We need to acknowledge that, and we need to deal with that. But I think we also have to recognize, though, that if this country hadn't changed, and most importantly changed for the better, there probably wouldn't be an African American in the White House. So, and I think we need to keep that in mind too as we address a lot of these issues.
Michael A. Thompson, you're up next, sir.
Mr. Mayor, we have 3 casinos in Detroit as we speak. What role do you see these casinos playing in the future economic development of the city?
I'll be honest and say I don't see them doing much more than what they're already doing. I know periodically...
Should they be doing more?
Could they be doing more? Well, but see, here's the thing. The one thing that we have to remember about casinos is that they're a business just like any other business. And you go into business to make money. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, if somebody opens up a hardware store, you're opening up that hardware store so you can make money. I mean, you're selling tools, but the objective is to make money. Because if you don't, you go out of business. If you open up a dry cleaner, you're in that business to make money. Casinos are no different. So let's not fool ourselves in thinking that these things opened up so they could dump all their profits into the city of Detroit and help us with our financial problems. Yes, they are dumping a portion of those profits into the city. You know, we get a percentage every single day. As a matter of fact, there's actually a spreadsheet that actually prints out from all three of the casinos every single day that shows what they have generated for the city of Detroit. But the bottom line is they're no different from that dry cleaner or that hardware store. They're in business to make money, and frankly, even they're not making as much as they used to. You know, this economy has shown that even casinos are not recession-proof. Their profits and their revenues are actually down. And the danger becomes if you start trying to go back to them and say, well, we need more, are you maybe cutting your nose to spite your face? I think we got to think about that.
I'm not trying to get you into the politics of gambling, but the question is, are you satisfied where things are as far as the casinos are concerned? Is the mayor of Detroit satisfied?
Am I satisfied with
Yes.
casinos?
Yeah. With
I
where
mean,
we
in
are
terms of the percentage
what
of
they're
money
doing
that
for
we're
the
getting
right.
from them or what?
Yes.
They put a lot into the city of Detroit. I would be happier if it hadn't been such a wash. And what I mean by that is the casinos have definitely benefited the city financially. And frankly, if we didn't have these three casinos, we would probably be in much worse shape. But part of the reason why it hasn't really been the huge windfall that I think a lot of folks were looking for it to be is because we were being cut in so many other areas at the same time that the casinos were coming online, that while yes, the money that they bring into the city of Detroit is useful, at the same time when we're getting cut in revenue sharing and you had other companies that were moving out of the city of Detroit, it ended up almost on a certain level kind of being more of a stabilizer than something that actually put us ahead, if that makes sense.
All right, thanks, Mayor Cockrel, for that. You're listening to a mayoral town hall meeting with Ken Cockrel Jr. from Wayne State University, broadcasting live on WDET. We have been collecting questions from the audience throughout the meeting so far, and we would like to ask you a few of those now, if that's okay, Mr.
Sure.
Mayor. The first question says, you have said in the past that you didn't really know how bad the city's deficit was when you became mayor, but why is that the case when you were president of city council?
Because the former mayor wasn't exactly truthful with us on what the numbers really were. I mean, let's be honest, he wasn't truthful with us on a couple of different, and I'm not ripping on him because I kind of, at a certain point in my administration, adopted a policy of saying, I'm not going to keep dumping on Kwame Kilpatrick because whatever problems he left behind, at this point, they're my problems. But in response to that question, I have to say, they were not forthcoming in what the true state of the budget was. And that's part of the reason why after we got in office, started peeling back the layers, so to speak, and took a look at the true state of the city's books, we were the ones who determined where we were really at.
Are you suggesting that there was anything illegal about the way the books were being kept during the Kilpatrick administration?
I don't know if it was so much a case of people hiding numbers or maybe just not having the capacity to really prepare them in the right way. I mean, when I took office, one of the first things that I had to do was actually complete a comprehensive annual, not me personally, but, you know, our team, a comprehensive annual financial report, which is mandated by the state. These are reports that have to be turned in at the conclusion of every single fiscal year. When I took office, the 2007 comprehensive annual financial report was 18 months late. It had not been done, even though I took office in September of 2008. So that was one of the first tasks that we actually had to complete. And the fact that that wasn't done is actually part of the reason why the books were a bit of a shambles.
All right, let's move on to the next one. This is from Lance, I believe, who says, over the past 7 months, what would you have done differently as mayor?
What would I have done differently over the course of the past 7 months? It's a very good question. Well, obviously, the one thing which we kind of talked about earlier is relative to the COBO issue, as I said. And again, I was involved in dealing with council. In retrospect, I probably would have been even more involved personally with council. I mean, you can't babysit them. I can't call up all 9 council members every single day. Are you okay with this? Are you okay? I can't do that. I don't have the time to do that because this is a tremendously demanding job. But there are certain things that I would have done. So.
Getting to the demanding job part, This next question says, with all of the problems that you're dealing with and with all that you could choose to do with your life, why do you want to run the city of Detroit?
Because I'm a sucker for punishment. No, I love this. I love this city. I mean, I love the city, and I feel I bring something to the table, and I want to work with the people of this city to try to move us forward.
Well, going back to the former mayor, do you know how many of the former mayor's staff are still working for you and why?
And if I had to boil it down to an exact number, I probably couldn't do that. In terms of why, they're there because I'm not going to treat people from the standpoint of, oh, you used to work for him, you got to go, you're tainted. I mean, I don't think that's a good way to deal with folks, and I think it's unfair to paint people with that brush. I mean, and that question has been put to me a lot. I mean, a lot of people say, why do you still have some of these Kilpatrick appointees working for him? Well, you know, at the end of the day, I don't think it's about whether or not somebody's a Cockrel appointee or a Kilpatrick appointee or Archer appointee or a Coleman Young appointee, because some of those folks that were working with Coleman Young, believe it or not, are actually still with the city to this day. At the end of the day, we all work for the city of Detroit, and that ought to be the goal. And I kind of look at it from a military perspective. If you've got good people who are prepared to stand up and say, the old general's gone, you're the new general, I'm prepared to follow you and help you lead the city where you think it needs to go. If you have people that are willing to stand up and do that, why wouldn't you give them a shot? Why kick them out the door just because of who they used to work for?
Well, let's move on to the issue of the crime lab, the decision to shut down the city's crime lab and the backlog that's created at other crime labs in the state. What is your plan moving forward to get this up and running in the city of Detroit and relieve some of that backlog and also address some of those cases that may be unhinged because of the crime lab errors?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very good question, and I know there's been a lot of stuff in the media about a war between me and the prosecutor. I actually talked to the Wayne County prosecutor this morning to just clear the air on a couple things relative to this. And we had a very positive conversation. But first thing is that the decision to actually close down the crime lab was actually my decision. And it was something that we did because we recognized, based on the findings in a Michigan State Police Department audit in one area of the crime lab that specifically dealt with the handling of firearms, that there was a major problem. And that there was a reason to believe that that problem transcended not only how the firearms were being dealt with, but also other areas of the crime lab. So I made the decision to shut the crime lab down with the understanding and based on conversations that we were having, not only with the Wayne County prosecutor, but also with the Michigan State Police. Our plan is to basically transition that work to the Michigan State Police and let them handle it in the same way that they deal with all the other cities in Michigan. Because Detroit actually was the only city in Michigan that operated its own crime lab. In fact, I don't know if this is true, but someone told me the other day, and I've got to check it out, that there may not even be any other major cities in the country that are running their own crime lab. But I've got to double check that. So the plan is to actually kick that to the Michigan State Police and let them process that work. We have already had discussions and already have an agreement with the Michigan State Police where they will absorb the majority of the employees from the crime lab into the Michigan State Police, so it should not result in much job loss. And also, as it relates to the prosecutor and the funds that she has requested to handle any cases that may be appealed as a result of this, we're prepared actually to work with the prosecutor on that. The only thing that's kept us from cutting that check is we just need to see a detailed budget so that we know exactly what it is we're paying for. There's also a possibility, based on a grant application that we have submitted to the federal government, that we may be able to get federal funds that would basically finance the unit that the Wayne County prosecutor wants to create to deal with any cases that may be appealed as a result of the issues in the crime lab.
Just a follow-up. So you would support a review of convictions associated with that crime lab?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's perfectly fair. And if I was an attorney representing someone who was convicted as a result of evidence that was processed through that crime lab, and I had reason to believe that maybe some of that evidence was mishandled, absolutely I would appeal. I think that is the right of anybody, and I support it.
All right, we've got another question here. This in regards to food issues. This person says, as a student who lives on Wayne's campus, I've had difficulty finding affordable food. Many residents are forced to do their shopping outside of the city. What will you do to bring in affordable and healthy food to the city, and how will you help to combat Detroit's obesity problem?
Very good question. Very good question. And as somebody who actually just lives a couple blocks away from here, I can relate to that. I mean, I know that the University Foods, the grocery store, is right over there, and I do a lot of shopping. Other than that, as far as grocery stores, We really don't have too much around here other than university foods. We've had some nice restaurants, of course, that have popped up over the years. But if you just want to do basic grocery shopping, I realize that options are limited. We do have something that we have launched through our Detroit Economic Growth Corporation called the Grocery Initiative, which is actually headed up by a young woman named Olga Starr. And one of the focuses of that initiative is to try to work to attract grocery stores to the city of Detroit and develop additional grocery stores here in the city of Detroit. And we're going to continue to work on that angle. As far as the fast food piece, we probably do have enough of those here in the city of Detroit. And even though I love Coney Island hot dogs, I mean, there's some areas where it's like you can't go a mile without seeing a car. I mean, I don't love them that much. So, I mean, it's a valid point. We do need to diversify shopping options here in the city of Detroit and make sure that more of those options are healthy.
All right, and we've got time for just one more. And this question is, given the problem of domestic violence in the community, what do you think should be done to combat domestic violence in Detroit? And what should your role be as mayor in that?
Well, I think our role is we have units within the police department as well as our health and wellness promotion department that address this from a couple different standpoints. We need to continue to fund that and also to support it. In addition to that, the city of Detroit does fund not only its own units, but also various community-based organizations. We fund them, and they offer domestic violence shelters, or in some cases, programs for people who are victims of domestic violence. And we finance those through our community development block grant process. These are federal funds that we get on an annual basis from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And we're going to continue to do that.
All right, well, we certainly appreciate your taking those questions from the audience. You now have 2 minutes for a closing statement, Mayor Cockrel.
Well, first off, I want to thank the sponsors of this event. I want to thank Wayne State University, which also happens to be my alma mater and former employer, as a matter of fact, for opening its doors and doing this event here. I want to thank all of our panelists and questioners, and I also want to thank the audience here in the room, as well as those people that are listening and those folks that are watching this being streamed live. Once again, it's been an honor and a pleasure to have served you as mayor for the past 7 months, and I'm looking forward to continuing to serve you, which is why I'm humbly asking for your vote next Tuesday, May 5th. I'm running for mayor and to keep the job of mayor because, as I said earlier, I have a love for this city, and I think at the end of the day that is the major qualification that anyone ought to bring to any elected position. But in addition to that, I have a proven track record of experience, and I have a plan for this city. I want to see this city move forward, and I believe that part of how we can move this city forward, as I said, is by first righting our ship financially, addressing our deficit issues through service reductions and also creative planning. I also believe that in order for us to ultimately stabilize our budget and grow our budget, we have got to do more to diversify our economy and attract and develop other types of businesses here in the city of Detroit. Not only small business development, although that will be critical, and statistically it's been shown and proven that most of our job growth is going to come from small businesses, but we also need to attract other types of businesses and industry to the city of Detroit. I'm a strong proponent of a green agenda, as I mentioned earlier, and I want to see the city of Detroit do all it can to diversify its economy by attracting solar power jobs, wind power jobs, hydroelectric power jobs, renewable energy, biofuels. And I also think it's going to be critical that as we're doing that we invest in workforce training and workforce retraining. With so many people now losing jobs because of what's happening in the big three, we need to be able to take those people and get them connected with other job opportunities. And if they're not ready for them, then we have to train them and get them prepared. I have a plan to do that. We're already doing it. With your vote, we can continue doing it. Thank you.
A big thank you to Mayor Cockrel for your time this afternoon. We appreciate you being with us today. Thanks also to Dave Bing, who was with us earlier. Thanks to our panelists, Hewell Perkins at Fox 2, and thanks to Fox 2 for streaming this event live today. We appreciate that. Rochelle Riley of the Detroit Free Press, always a pleasure to see you. And Bankalei Thompson of the Michigan Chronicle, thank you very much for being here. I'm Craig Foley. We're now going to head back to Quinn Kleinfelter in the WDET studios. Thank you very much as well to Wayne State University. Have a great day.